Hello folks, thanks so much for having me today. My talk was originally planned for WordCamp Asia 2020 and it was titled Using WordPress with GraphQL. And I thought of presenting it for the live stream that we are having on Saturday. And thanks again for having me, and you can follow me on Twitter at MohsinLK. My name is Mohammed Mohsin and I am a senior React developer at RTCamp, a WordPress VIP agency from India. I like to travel to different places. This was a photo I took in India at Krispy Kreme, and I also love to take photographs of wildlife. For example, this was taken at a safari, and this was also taken in northern Sri Lanka, a bunch of mangoes. Let's talk a little bit about a brief history. In WordPress, we had something called XML RPC, which was used to communicate remotely with WordPress. I have not used it before, but after some time, we got something called the REST API, the WordPress REST API. It started off as a Google Summer of Code project by Ryan McHugh back in 2013, and eventually it got made into a WordPress plugin. And finally, in 2016, we got the REST API merged into WordPress core in WordPress 4.7 version. And it was a great achievement since we could now talk to WordPress via the REST API and use WordPress as an application framework as opposed to a CMS only. So we could have something like the WordPress REST API talk to any web application and any native application, mobile or desktop, and more. Any endpoint could talk to the WordPress REST API now. So that brought the WordPress as a headless CMS trend. So we had many sites that were created with WordPress only as a data source, and the site was either a React site or a Node.js site or even Angular or Vue.js site. So this was the decoupled WordPress trend. And it also had a lot of advantages like being very fast and sometimes very secure. And now this got the idea of using WordPress as parts of it. Rather than using the whole monolithic WordPress software, we could use parts of WordPress as and when we want. For example, you could have a huge site where the blog part was coming from WordPress, where the content was written for the blog through WordPress. REST is great, and it has served many purposes for WordPress. It also has a few disadvantages. For example, REST API is a bit slow, and it is also gives us more data than we want, or sometimes less data than we want. For example, let's say I want to have the title and excerpt of a post, but if you use the REST API, you would get more than the title and the excerpt. You would get the content, you would get the date and featured media ID and so on. So which creates a lot of overhead. We are passing tons of data over the wire, and it's not an ideal use of resource. And sometimes you will have to request data from multiple endpoints. For example, let's say you want to have a post and also its author and the featured image. Now we will have to query 3 different endpoints. Let's add the category and tags. So now we have to query 5 different REST API endpoints, which is not ideal. So that's where GraphQL comes in. With GraphQL, GraphQL is a query language for your API, and it is an alternative to REST API. With GraphQL, you ask what you need, and you get exactly that, and no more, no less. With GraphQL, there is one single endpoint where you query all your data, and you get many resources with just a single request. With GraphQL, we describe what's possible with a type system and a schema. And yeah, it's created by Facebook, and Facebook open sourced the software. And now it's a spec. This is how a GraphQL query would look like. You ask for a resource and the fields of that resource, and you would get the data just the way you ask it, just the data you ask it in the shape that you ask for it. Now, where does WordPress come in? So when you want to implement GraphQL with WordPress, there are a couple of options. So the first option would be to wrap the WP WordPress REST API in a GraphQL schema. So it is a good option, but it also has the disadvantages, like talking through the REST API means we still have the slowness or the underfetching or overfetching of REST API. You could use a caching mechanism, but it's more complicated than the next method that we are going to see. The second way is to use the plugin GraphQL for WordPress, or in short, WPGraphQL. Let's talk a little bit about WPGraphQL. WPGraphQL is a free open source WordPress plugin that provides an extendable GraphQL schema and an API for any WordPress site. So it was created by Jason Ball, and it exposes WordPress data as GraphQL schema. And with WPGraphQL, you install a WordPress plugin, and it also has add-ons for WooCommerce, advanced custom fields, and so on. We can check out a small demo of how WPGraphQL works. So this is a playground that Jason Ball created. So let's say you want to get the general settings and the title, description, and language. You just ask for it, and you would get the exact same data as you ask. So if you want to ask for posts, you ask for the posts, and there is a layer between the nodes and the post, which is called edges. Edges will have some metadata about the nodes, and the nodes are actually the data that will be returned. For example, let's say you want like the ID, the title, and date and excerpt. So you would get all these as in exactly as you want. Let's say you want to ask about the featured image. So if you want the featured image, you would get the featured image just like you ask. If there is a featured image, for example, there is a featured image here, it will give you the source URL of the featured image. And the more you can ask, let's say you want to ask the category. And the category names. So now you would get the category names, as you can see, the category names. So let's say you want to ask a single post, and you would give the ID of the post, and you would get that exact post. And let's say you want to ask for pages. You would get the pages that you ask, and so on and on. Okay. Categories, users, plugins, themes, and settings, and so on. Okay, now back to the demo. Back to the okay. So we saw what the playground WPGraphQL was, and with GraphQL you can query through WordPress data from virtually any GraphQL client. It can even be a web client or a desktop client or even a mobile application client. So let's give a small demo comparison of the speed of getting data from REST API versus WPGraphQL. Let's say I want to get the title of the first 100 posts. So from my blog, I'm trying to get the first 100 posts. This is the data loading through the WordPress REST API. Now, let's try this. So if you see here, it takes a good 2.5 seconds. And let's do the same thing with the WPGraphQL. So given I just want the title of the first 35 posts. I have 35 posts right now. So getting the title of the first 35 posts takes 400 milliseconds as compared to 2.5 seconds with the REST API. So that's a small speed comparison if you want to get only the title. So the disadvantage with REST API is it does not give only the title, but it also gives more data than we ask for. So let's talk a little bit about some of the uses of WordPress GraphQL or WP GraphQL. You could use WP GraphQL with Next.js, for example. You can use Apollo GraphQL plugin or Apollo GraphQL package npm module to query the WP GraphQL schema. And this is a project, WP Decoupled, that we created to explore WP GraphQL and also WPGraphQL, where we created e-commerce site with WPGraphQL and WP GraphQL. So we created the cart system, and we also made it offline ready. So even if there is no internet, this would work. So when you go offline, and it would still work. So this was created using Next.js and hosted on Zeit now on a serverless system. Okay. So Next.js and GraphQL, WP GraphQL, are a good combination. So you can also use GraphQL with Gatsby. We install Gatsby source GraphQL plugin in your Gatsby site, and which would fetch the data from WP GraphQL and stitches the schema, and the Gatsby site would be now blazing fast. And this is a project that I created along with Jason Ball, Zach Gordon, Hossein, and Alexa. So even Gatsby and GraphQL go really well together. WP GraphQL with WooCommerce. So there is a plugin called WooGraphQL, which was created by Jeffrey Taylor, who is maintaining it. And it exposes WooCommerce as a GraphQL schema. And with that, you can also build static e-commerce sites. And when you do a static e-commerce site, for example, with Gatsby, you can host it on Netlify and create Netlify Lambda for processing payments with the Stripe API. So let's talk a little bit about extending WP GraphQL. So when you want to have a custom post type with WP GraphQL, you register the custom post type, and then for show in GraphQL parameter, you pass it as true in the array. And the GraphQL single name and the plural name you have to specify. And let's say you want to add a custom meta field in the GraphQL schema. So you would add an action and then call the register GraphQL field, which would where you give the name of the field, which in this case is color, and where the field should occur. So in this case, it will come inside the post data type, post type, and the type is string, and the description, you give a description for the documentation, and then it resolves to a function where it will fetch the post meta and return the color which was fetched, otherwise a default color of blue. So let's talk a little bit about my demo, so which I created last night. So most of you who have worked with React and know about the community would have come across this developer, Dan Abramov, and he has a blog where he has the coffee cups indicating how long a post would take to read. So I thought, why not do the same thing for my blog, which is in Gatsby, and the data which is coming from WordPress via WP GraphQL. So I thought, let's create an extension that would fetch the word count and then return the number of minutes it would take to read that post. So this would show in a Gatsby plus WordPress blog. It should be a simple solution, and that is the plugin that I created. So let's talk a little bit about the plugin. So this is the plugin, and if you ask for reading time, it will give us the reading time in minutes. So this is my WordPress site, which is using the 2020 theme, and I am showing that in my Gatsby site so that like I can access it like very fast. As you can see how fast it is, and I also wanted to show how many minutes it would take to read a typical post, and I wanted to show them using some cookies, so add some fun into it. And let's get into the code of it. So I created the plugin and the plugin name and so on, and it's a very simple single page plugin. In this, you register the field for the post and call the field name as reading time, and that will be a string, and it will call the WPGQL RT calculate reading time, which will in turn fetch the post ID, which is coming from here, post ID, and that post ID contents, and then strip all the tags and count the number of words. So we hard-coded a word count of 300, and we divide it by the word count, words per minute, and then return the reading time. So if you want to test it out, I go to my blog, go to WPGraphQL, and I'll type it out again. I go to posts. I can either do edges in node or directly nodes, and I ask for the title and the reading time. So it will give me the reading time of my posts, and let's say I want first 100, like all the posts in my blog. It will give me the reading time of all my blog posts. So I have a blog post which will take 12 minutes to read, and if it's take less than 300 words, it will give as less than 1. So I wanted to use this in my Gatsby blog. So what I did was I created the post header meta, which is a component, which is a React component, and I first of all fetched the reading time in GraphQL query, and then use that, pass that into this, and then if it can be passed as an integer, I divide it by 2, meaning I would eat one cookie for 2 minutes, every 2 minutes. So I would push the cookies inside this array, and then this would be shown here. So if there is a reading time, it would show this bullet point, and the cookies would be joined, and the reading time will be output with the min read. So let's show how it works in blog. So it would say 2 cookies and 4-minute read. So I thought this is a fun demo to show in this talk that I wanted to prepare. So I coded this up last night to show it to you. And some of the code that I wrote are from the reading time WP plugin, and also thanks to Jason Ball for creating WPGraphQL. So if you want to check this out, it's on my GitHub repo. So back to the talk. And querying reading time, we just saw that. You ask for the reading time, and it will give us the read time in minutes. So the end result on a WordPress plus Gatsby blog which is what we just saw. Some of the takeaways from my talk you can take away are WPGraphQL is helping modernize WordPress. For example, if you use WPGraphQL with Apollo, you can use it for any JavaScript front-end framework, and you can directly use it with any JavaScript client that is run on a server-side language, or even for variables as long as they do have a WPGraphQL client. And I would also encourage you to be part of the WordPress GraphQL community on Slack and on Twitter. They are very helpful folks, and I hope you would join the community. And this is a quote from Matt, which he was asked at an interview. And he said, "I almost wonder if we should have skipped REST API and gone straight to GraphQL." This is not saying REST API is bad, but just saying like there are some advantages that GraphQL has over REST API. That's how I understood this. And why would you not use WP GraphQL? And for the moment, you need an extra plugin, so it's not baked into core yet, and it is also in beta. But although it's stable, but it is not yet out of beta, and it also needs other extensions for existing plugins. For example, if you want to use WooCommerce, you have to use another plugin or write your custom extension if there is no dedicated WP GraphQL extension for that plugin. So that would be a disadvantage if you would want to consider using WP GraphQL. And it is similar even for REST API. What we covered today, we saw WordPress as an API with XML, REST API, and now GraphQL. And we saw the differences between REST and GraphQL, and how we would use GraphQL with WordPress, like REST API wrapped in GraphQL or dedicated WP GraphQL plugin. And we saw how to use it with Next.js and Gatsby. And we finally saw extending WP GraphQL and used a demo example. And also we saw a few other use cases. And I would encourage you to let us use GraphQL. This is a React hook. This is how you would normally write a React hook when you use it. So I just wanted to have a play on words. And then thank you for everyone who organized this live stream. Matt, Andrea, Brian, and all the folks who worked hard on making this live stream a success. And RTCamp is hiring. You can pick rt.camp/join if you want to check out our openings. And that's it from me. Thank you. Bye.